Welcome back to Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm doing a Corgi 233 Heinkel. This is what you would call a bubble car, and I don't know where I got this toy from, but it's been in my collection for a while, and it's it's not in bad condition, but it is scraped up a bit, and I've decided I'm going to do a pure restoration on this one. And that's where I'm going with it. There were other bubble cars. This was done after the war. The Heinkel was making airplanes for the Nazis in the Second World War, and afterwards people needed cheap cars, so they basically made these very simple bubble cars with 3 wheels and motorcycle engines, and this is one of them. So I'm going to be doing exactly the same. So I'm going to try and match the paint, and that's what I'm doing here. And so before I do anything with the model, I've got to get the right color. So this took a while, and it looks pretty good there in the jar. So I move on to removing the single rivet. And you can see I'm having trouble controlling this thing. I'm not used to using the Dremel tool, but I have found that it's useful, and I just got to practice a little bit more so I make it a little bit more rigid so it doesn't get away from me. And so it put a little bit of damage on that base, which I'm not too worried about. It's very, very shallow because it just touched it really. So I'm able to get these rivets off pretty good. I'm finding that the Dremel tool is actually quieter than I remembered, so it's pretty good to do also if other people, I don't want to disturb other people in the house. So there, the base comes off. Fairly simple, and inside has a beautiful red interior and a beautiful bubble dome that's it's a little bit scraped up. So the base is not bad, and I'm gonna have to take these wheels and axles off. And I was watching Lazilo did this same model, and he discovered you can just pull these springs out of the base, so you're able to take this thing apart. They would have been put in perfectly straight, and they were crimped, but obviously we can't do that. So the good thing is we can pull them out, and then we just have to make sure that we put them back in such a way that the springy part is gonna be pushing against the axles. So there we go. The main axle has fixed hubs, and the wheels or tires on all these look pretty good, so I'm not worried too much about them. And the third wheel, it's a little bit tricky. It's in there. I think you have to pull the axle out, at least on my model. I think it might just be because of the way the casting is. This wheel looks like it's a little bit offset, so we're going to look at that a little bit later. So the other thing I'm doing is this is going to be a very hard model to put into the vise in my milling machine, and I've been watching a lot of other people's videos, and they all do this by hand, and so I'm going to be doing that on this one by hand, like all my friends who are doing the same kinds of restorations. So I go in with the center drill, and you can see it's off center a little bit, so I point it to one direction, and once I get the thing going straight, then I straighten out the drill, and then it kind of aligns the hole to the post, so that when I put a screw in there, it's going to be on center on the base. I'm doing the same there with the drill. So this is a tap drill for a 440 screw, and I've put a piece of tape there to mark the depth because I don't want to punch right through the hood of the front door, I guess, of my Heinkel. So this is a 440 tap, and it's a spiral flute tap, so the flutes come out as you cut, which is great so they don't accumulate at the bottom of the hole. And that's important on these things because the holes are not very deep, so I need to get my threads as deep as possible so that I can put a screw in there. So this one got in pretty deep, maybe it's enough, but I went in anyway with a bottoming tap, which actually I made. So it's actually a spiral point bottoming tap. It has a bit of a spiral still, and I go in and I take the tapered part of the thread off, and it makes the screw be able to go in a little bit deeper. I might not have needed this, but I figure I'm there, I've got the thing all lubricated, I'm going to go ahead and do it and make sure that I don't have to come back again. So here's one of my 440 screws. It's a button head cap screw and it goes in beautifully. So now I'm going to go strip the paint off of this, go outside, I put some boiling water from a kettle, and then I go with the, what's that stuff called? Caustic soda. Got my caustic soda, and in the boiling water it goes nuts, especially when a big chunk of dried up powder goes in there, and it went a little bit crazy, but that's okay. I have a second plastic bin that catches any overflow. So here you can see the parts, they've been stripped, and the casting is like really super good. There's almost no flaws in it. There's a little bit on that door, but I figure that's going to fill in just with the primer paint. And then there's a little horn on the roof on the left side there. So I'm going to go in there with a file and clean that up. That's the only flaw on the casting, so that's pretty good. So I spend a couple minutes and get that thing nice and smooth. And you can see I'm wearing gloves. I'm wearing gloves. These were the ones I wore when I was doing the paint stripping. I wore them as long as I could. Now, this paint is the primer, pink primer, and it's way too dark compared with the paint, so I'm worried that's not going to get covered. So I put white primer over the pink primer. Then I put my pre-mixed paint into the airbrush, and I head off to the spray booth to give it a coat of pink paint. So there it is. It's got the pink paint and it looks beautiful. In fact, it's so good a coat that I got on there that I have no intention of putting any clear coat on top of it to smooth it out. So here's the bubble. The bubble looks pretty good. I mean, it's scraped up, and it's scraped up in a way that's mild. It was very well looked after toy. So I'm going in with my micro mesh. These are specifically plastic polishing sheets. They're cloth backed and they've got a rubber coating, and then the grit is on there, and you got to go step by step. You can see I'm going step by step, and I have to get each layer completely clean from the previous layer before I go to the next one. So this is obviously speeded up a lot, and I'm able to go make it faster for you, but it took me a while, almost an hour, to polish this thing up to 12,000 grit. And I remember Marty of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. He used a 12,000 grit, and he said it's like sanding with a piece of paper. So anyway, it came out beautiful because that stuff is amazing. Now this is the rear wheel, that third wheel. You can see one side is very thin. I was thinking if I want to make it look like this one, I would have to machine my own. I decided not to. It's in the middle, it's not visible, and it still works even if it's not perfect. That's probably why they selected that flawed hub for the third wheel, because it's not really visible. And I couldn't see it before I took it apart, and you'll never see it after it goes back together again. So I'm polishing up the ends of the front hubs so they look all shiny and new. And now I've got my wheels. These wheels are in very good condition. I just want to gloss them up, so I'm using Meguiar's formula for making shiny tires, like real tires, and I'm doing the same thing on these small tires. And after I do this, I wipe off the excess. I don't need too much, just to make them a bit shiny. And it makes them look beautiful, like they're new. So here's the rear wheel, the third wheel going on. So I find I need to put an axle, and that gives me a little bit more control over that tiny little hub, because you kind of have to bend it in different ways to get the tire to go back on, and with the axle is the only way you're going to be able to do that. So there we go, got the third wheel on, and the other ones already have an axle attached. And if I can keep the thing in my fingers, I can put it on. So those ones went on very easily, and I'm wiping off any excess of the Meguiar's stuff so it's not too slippery. Now to put these axles back in to the base, I want to raise it up so that the wheels and the tires are hanging over the edge, because that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. So I took a piece of wood, and for the front it's no problem. For the rear, I put this axle in there, and then I got to get the wheel lined up. This is not an easy operation because these are such tiny parts. And you can see the axle just falls out. So I have a little bit of an adventure. I'm sure if I got too frustrated, I would make a special jig or something to get this thing to go in. Anyway, took a couple tries, and then it pops in, and it's perfect. Now to put those springs back in, I cleaned up the ends of those springs because they were just cut off by Dinky, and they won't slide in there. So I took the sharp edge off of it, and even then it's hard to slide them back in. They want to dig into the metal. So here I go. You can see it wasn't working because it was sharp and it would just dig in. So take a file, clean up the end, and it's still going to get stuck on the same spot. So let's go and use this tiny little prong-nosed liars and hammer it in with those, because this is very small parts. I don't need to bring out the full-size hammer. So here I've already cleaned up the end of the spring, and I go straight to the hammer. So once it's past that edge, it's easier just to push that in. Now the springs are a little bit bent because of the way I pulled them out, so I just take pliers and turn them both so that the curve is going to make the spring tighter against the axles. So that wasn't a lot of work. It's all ready to go back together. The windshield goes in. It's not riveted in or anything. Then the interior goes on top of it, and the base has these posts sticking up, so that's what's going to push that interior in. So I take out my mounting screw, which has now been painted pink, and I go to put the base in. You can see those posts sticking out. Those are what holds the interior and the windscreen, or the windshield in, and it pops in very, very satisfactorily. It's a good feeling when it pops in like that. And I put the screw in, snug it down, and all that's left now is some detailing. So I go in with the silver paint, and I'm not doing anything at all extra, even though there's a lot of temptation on this model to detail some tiny little details that are in the casting, but of course Dinky wasn't going to paint those. I got about 20 brushes, and so each time I've got to decide which brush is most suitable for what I'm painting. In this case, this is my oldest brush, and it's a Tamiya brush. And for smaller things, I need to use a different brush. But this one, for this fairly simple model, this brush works both on the bumper and on the headlights. And then I use the same brush on the back where the number plate is. Of course, there was no number plate, it was just painted silver, so I'm doing exactly what was on the original toy in this case. These were very popular, these bubble cars, for a while after the war, because they were very cheap. They were motorcycle parts and motorcycle engines, and they were ruling the market up until they were taken out of the market by the Mini Cooper. Mini Cooper was also a very cheap car with tiny little wheels, and it was like a miniature car, but it had doors on the sides, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side, and it had front seat and a back seat, and it looked like an ordinary car, and so it kind of brought about the end of these bubble cars. It was just a better design. So to remind you where we started, this is the toy. It's not in terrible condition, it just needed to be painted basically, and I polished up the glass, and I polished up the wheels and made it look a little prettier. So let's see what it looks like now. So I think that's a really nice improvement. It looks glossy and shiny and doesn't have any wear on it anymore. It basically looks like the toy would have looked if you had bought the thing new. So this was one of the easiest models I ever did, and actually I think it's one of the most perfect models I've ever done. There was absolutely no flaws in this restoration, and I'm very, very pleased with it. I think it looks beautiful. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Timo's Dinky Detailing. Until next time, be seeing you.